week with us. There are 4 blessings that we say during the Havdallah service. One of them is a blessing over spices. And if we were all in person, as Jessica sings that blessing, I would pass this beautiful and delicious spice box around, and everybody inhales the smells. And again, the idea is to match the physicality and the smell of sweetness with the idea of bringing the sweetness of Shabbat into the rest of the week. And so right now we say Shabbat Shalom. When the service ends in about 10 minutes, we'll say Shavua Tov, which means have a good week.
All right, so as the rabbi said, we will start with the Havdallah blessings. Yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai, lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai, lai 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 lai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen, borei peri hagafen. Yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai, lai 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 lai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei minei besamim, borei minei besamim. Yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai, lai 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 lai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei morei ha'esh, borei morei ha'esh. Yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamavdil bein kodesh lechol, hamavdil bein kodesh lechol. Yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai, lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai, lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai, yai lai lai, yai lai lai. All right, and now we will move on to pray for the prophet Elijah to come and proclaim the redemption this week. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi, Bimera Bayamenu, Yavo Eleinu, Imashiach ben David, Imashiach ben David, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi. And then last, lastly, we will hope for a good week together this week with Shavua Tov. Shavua Tov, 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 Shavua Tov. A good week, a week of peace. May happiness and joy increase. A good week, a week of peace. May happiness and joy increase. Shavua Tov, 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 Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov, everyone. I hope this is the beginning of a wonderful week. Don't anyone go anywhere, though, of course. Jessica, Yasha Koach, and thank you, as always, for enhancing our services with your ruach and talent. We're going to continue in just a moment. I'm just going to change the video spotlighting here. Here we go. Well, welcome everyone. We are really excited about this program tonight. And I hopefully, especially members of the congregation, they've known me for the past 7 years. So I'm not going to introduce myself as much as introduce Dr. Zachary Friedman. Zach and his wife, Callie, moved to Athens. Zach, I can't believe you're on your 4th year already. That is unbelievable to me. They moved here 3 years ago and joined the synagogue very shortly afterwards. And Emily and I met them. Actually, they requested to meet me looking for a temple to come to and worship and join. And soon after, the 4 of us became very dear friends. And they have a beautiful son, Abraham, who, of course, is a wonderful playmate and friend to our Aaron. And so it's wonderful for them to be in the community for a variety of reasons. They are both wonderful members and additions to our community here in Athens. And Dr. Friedman serves as the interim director of counseling and psychological services at Gwinnett College. He has many hobbies and interests and skills, and interpreting movies is one of them. Not for tonight, but he likes to razz me a little bit. We saw the movie The Favorite together. I don't know if anyone saw that. And he basically had to explain it to me afterwards. And I was convinced that he read lots of articles on it because it was so erudite and specific. And I think you'll really enjoy his insights tonight. And with that, we're going to get started. So one of the things that we want to talk about is Jewish representations in film. And it was important to us to talk about representations by Jews. And so in all 5 films that we chose, which are all modern to some degree, either the writer, director, or actor involved is Jewish. And so there is a Jewish component in the making of the movie. And I think many of the Jews on this call will be nodding their heads to this, is a lot of times we ask ourselves, is this good for the Jews? That's a question that we ask a lot. And when there is a portrayal of Jews in modern culture, especially in pop culture, I think that question comes up, and that's something that we're going to, delve around and speak to this evening. One thing also that's important is representation. Is as a minority, I think it's important that Jews are represented in film and music, and all the gamut of life. That is not only in the synagogue. Zach?
Yeah, let me first say I'm glad to be here. And it's funny to me, Rabbi and I talk about movies all the time. And now I'm glad that there are 80 other people who will listen to us talk about movies. Hopefully, they will enjoy it as much as you and I do. So, when we talk about representation, building off of what Rabbi Linder said, and this what is good, what is bad, I am at my core a clinical psychologist, and so it's hard for me not to think, and oftentimes about kind of what I talk about with patients. And one of the things I talk about with patients is against this sort of what we call dichotomous or black and white thinking. This is all good or this is all bad. A lot of people come in and they say, you know, I want to know if this is the good thing I should do, or I don't want to do the bad thing. And so I work a lot with people about having to understand thinking where two things can be true at the same time, right? So there are the films we're going to talk about. Some of the stuff is pretty good for Jews, is a sort of good representation. Some stuff in the same film is not as good, and both is true. There's not a net where this movie is just real bad, you know, for Jews. And so I want us to think about that as we talk about these films, that there are sort of components that make it more complex.
And it was very purposeful that, you know, in some ways we went from the ridiculous to the sublime. I mean, Borat and A Serious Man in some ways can't be far enough from each other. But, you know, for one thing, people have different interest levels. And so we wanted to appeal to as many people as possible in terms of what movies just simply you like. But also because we are so sensitive, and by we, I mean the Jewish people, so sensitive, and I think rightly so, given our history and anti-Semitism, and of course the Holocaust, which you know is the subject of one of our movies, Defiance. It very much plays into this topic of, oh, what will other people think? What will the non-Jews think when they see this? And so that's something else we're going to talk about tonight.
You know, and one of the things, I'm checking our notes. One of the things that comes up for me about what does it mean to be, you know, again, good for, is this good representation, is this bad representation, is I was listening to an interview recently with Rami Youssef, who is Muslim. He's a writer, he's a stand-up, he has a show called Rami, and it is about what does it mean to be a contemporary Muslim man. And in the interviewer asked him, you know, how do you think Muslims look at your show? And his response was sort of, I don't know how to answer that question because, you know, Muslims are a heterogeneous group. So there are definitely going to be people who watch it who say, oh man, this is my life. And other people who say, I don't relate to this at all. And that made me think of what we're talking about today, that these films have different pieces where, you know, Rabbi and I identify as reform. And so there's going to be stuff for, you know, that lands with us that somebody who's maybe conservative or orthodox that it doesn't gel with. And that's why it gets even more complex when you talk about, is this good for Jews? Because we are a very lively and diverse group. Just realized the next point, we have notes. There's the next point is mine as well. That's why there was that pause. Back to this piece about representation, Rabbi and I were talking about this. And again, we love talking about films. We do it all the time. But there is, we want this to be fun, and it will be fun. There is a level of seriousness in that it's real. Anti-Semitism is around and it is on the rise. The Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, who tracks anti-Semitism in the US, some of their data was showing that from 2015 to 2019, there was a steep rise with a spike in 2016 after a 15-year low. And that is very, very striking. So it's not like, it's not this in our heads or is that a thing? There's data showing that there is this massive increase, especially in the US, of anti-Semitism that comes from a lot of different places. And, you know, during the Capitol riots, Rabbi and I talked a lot about this. I mean, this is just weeks ago. People are walking around with shirts that are, you know, Camp Auschwitz, you know, and very, very clear in the US anti-Semitism. And so it's a complex subject talking about what contributes to that. I like to think of it as a pie chart. There are many things. And for me, I can't help but think that art contributes to it, whatever it is, whether it's literature, TV, or film. And so some of what we talk about that, you know, does it matter? Well, we want this, but there is a reality to, there is a history of Jews as a minority being created as an other, and that is bad for us. It was deliberately used in World War II. It's not just for Jews, it's used as a tactic when people are created as others. So how we are represented matters a lot. And I can't help but think also in, these conspiracy theories that are floating around when it comes to, Jews controlling the media and this larger stuff are just so rampant now. So much so that even in our own state, for those who are on this call from Georgia, one of our representatives has in the past at least spouted this idea about these conspiracies. So it is very, very concerning for us talking about this and why we think representation is important.
And just in terms of kind of logistics, and we're going right into it in about 30 seconds, is by no means at all is this meant to be exhaustive or suggestive of every Jewish thought or the wide gamut of theology. Is Rabbi Young, who I mentioned earlier, he teaches a class where one movie gets a theme, and he teaches it for pretty substantively. And you could almost do this with any movie, not necessarily ones that were only written by Jews or played by Jews. So that's one thing. As we get started, we are under the assumption that you've seen the movie. So we're not necessarily summarizing. We're also not doing film critique. Like, we're not going to talk about costumes and how the acting is. The idea is to tease away or to tease out parts that make us think of Judaism and Jewish identity, whether it was meant to or not. And by the way, there's a lot of parallels for me with the Torah in that way, in terms of authorship. Did the author mean that? Did the author, is it something that we bring to the table ourselves? It might be another program, but that's always in the back of my head. Our plan, and we hope to succeed, is that for each movie, we'll spend about 7 minutes on it, and each of us is kind of the lead on one of them, and then the other will kind of jump in, and we'll maybe have some back and forth. And then Abraham Tesser has the daunting challenge of monitoring the chat, because since we're going to talk about all 5 movies one in a row, a question may come to you about a movie that we've talked about. Please put it in the chat. Abraham will take note of it, and then when we're done, he will select a selection of those questions and thoughts to pose to me and Zach. And so with that, we are going to fly into the birdcage.
And by the way, Rabbi's noting about we're not talking about film technique. That's really not for anybody but me, because I need that as a reminder so I don't just talk about that. So we start off with a fun one, the Birdcage. In rewatching it the other day, my wife and I were talking, we were trying to calculate how many times we'd each seen it. At least 12 to 15 times would be my guess. And so in rewatching it, teasing apart, what is the thing that sticks out the most? And so one piece that when I started thinking about it, there's this joke about their names. Coleman versus Goldman, that they change the name when they have Senator Keeley's family come. And so I was like, well, that's really kind of the only Jewish joke. A lot of the rest is about sort of queer culture and being gay. What does that mean? But when I think about it more, and there are a lot of parallels in this film for the LGBTQ population and for Jews about erasure. And so that thing that seems like a throwaway joke about a name, to me, I kept thinking about, how many Jewish immigrants came to the US and had their name changed. That there is much more, how many people who've gone into industries, still 100 years ago, who couldn't have a Jewish name. So it's this very quick joke that, they hit every now and then, that it rhymes, it's funny, that I think has a lot of depth in it about this. What does it mean to be erased? And that is a huge plot point. They have to change their entire identity to not act as if they have anything gay or queer or anything in their house, and also nothing Jewish. And I think this idea of hidden identities, that's why I think there are parallels between queer culture and Jewishness that go hand in hand, that is very, very striking, that has a lot of, to me, frankly, a lot of sadness and anger in there built under all of these jokes. That's one of the big things that came up for me.
Yeah, and Emily and I, we watched it about 3 months ago, and then we watched it again 2 nights ago. That's how much we like the movie. It is, when Armand does decide to kind of do what his son is asking, which in my opinion is incredibly selfish. Also, I mean, it's really kind of chutzpah, what his son is asking, but. He does wear a Jewish star. You could see it at the beginning of the film, and he puts it under his shirt, and he says, "Do you want me to be somebody I'm not?" And Moses Mendelssohn was a Jewish philosopher, and one of the phrases he said, it's probably his most well-known comment, was, he very much was an assimilated Jew, as I think Armand is in the film, maybe too much, perhaps. And he said, it's okay to be a Jew in your home, but when you go out in the street, be a normal, be quote unquote a normal person, be assimilated. And here, what's so tragic is he can't even be a Jewish person in his home. As a matter of fact, it not only does he have to get rid of the Jewish symbols, he has the huge crucifix. What does she call it? Austere or rigid or
I think it's
severe?
austere.
Severe.
It's a very austere sort of calmness with that cross that's probably as tall as I am. Yeah, it is a lot about that and I somehow I just like, I'm like, oh, when I was younger, like that's a funny joke. But I think, Rabbi and I were talking about it. There's so much depth to that. I think if you, my wife pointed this out, we were on a walk this morning talking about, there is a whole other layer about the stereotype of, Jews in Florida. They are Jews in Florida. And so and this sort of, is that good? Is that bad? I think it's just that's real. There was another thing as I was just stewing on this that came up for me is at the very end when the Keeleys are sort of stuck. How do we get them out of here? That it hit me that in so many movies, often the World War II ones, it's about smuggling the Jews somewhere, put them over here, we've got to help them escape. And that this takes that idea of helping people escape and just turns it on its head, of by putting them in, putting Senator Keeley, Gene Hackman in drag, putting Diane Wiest in drag, and everybody, so they can sort of blend in again, which gets to that erasing their sense of self as a way to blend in with the dominant culture, being the club. The club has this dominant culture of being a drag performance club. And so it really strikes me how much this movie, in themes and all that, ties everything into every specific thing. So I just thought that was quite interesting.
And something I honestly, Zach, I hadn't thought of it until just now, is, it's, I think something most of us can relate to, regardless of religion, is, and many people have seen My Big Fat Greek Wedding. I mean, the theme plays into that also, of when families blend, figuring out what part of one's identity is kind of malleable and what's not. And I think of this. There are many Jews for whom interfaith relationships are a big deal, and there's a lot of pain in some families regarding that. And similarly speaking, with non-Jews as well, people, oftentimes one wants to marry within their race, religion, culture, socioeconomic status, and when there's a blend, kind of figuring out the boundaries of, okay, I can do this, but I am not willing to do this. And I think the Birdcage takes that to an extreme, but it's something that I think we all have dealt with to some degree.
Which you also have at the end of the film, that the final scene is the wedding, where you have what appears to be a priest and a rabbi marrying them, and then half the church is sort of this sort of the waspy crowd, and the other half is, the sort of gay, drag crowd from Miami. So you do have that blended. Again, played for a joke, but again, even just right under that, there's much more to it, as you just pointed out.
You want to
I
go
think we
on?
can move. Yeah, I think we can move to the producers. So,
Open.
so with the producers, Mel Brooks, who I remember a million years ago when I was younger, seeing him on 60 Minutes, which oddly enough, I found that interview quoted online, him talking about this, that Mel Brooks said that his life's work was to make Hitler look like a fool. and that Mel Brooks talked about how, Hitler was known for yelling and and rhetoric and propaganda, and that if the other side, whatever, it was yelling and did all that, that you're just matching, and it doesn't really help. That the way to manage it from his approach is to undercut him, is to make him look like a fool. And so in this film, you have, the biggest fool is Hitler, right? Is the absurdity of, he really it's a terrific takedown, frankly, of Hitler. Not that it's that hard to make Hitler look bad, but really in a very, very silly way. There is another piece to that I will get to in a moment. But in watching this, if we talk about stereotypes and what's good representation, the first half made me a little anxious, had a little spilkus about it, because as it starts, it's about a Jewish character who is scheming and is really very focused on money, right? And is trying to manipulate, and also is into sort of production, this idea of like controlling Hollywood, this ludicrous conspiracy that a lot of people who are conspiracy theorists are in. And so you have the beginning of, the scheming. I'm like, this doesn't feel good. But that sets up the rest of the film, where the second half is showing how that isn't actually helpful. And really, I would argue the ending is about art for art's sake, and really being about what does it mean to create something. So I think these stereotypes that came up for me a minute, like, that doesn't really look good for us, is meant to be there as something that isn't good. It's not meant to be something that's inherently who we are. I'll toss it to you. I don't know if you want to talk about what points you want to talk about.
And when Emily and I rewatched this, she made a point which I agree with, which is this could not be made in 2020, 2021. And I think that's accurate. But then I ask myself, should it be? I mean, in other words, and I really ask this question, and it's an open question. I mean, is it sad that that kind of humor isn't, and the only word I can find right now is allowed, right? That it's not, it's not considered appropriate. And I know, there are Jews who are offended by that movie, by that Broadway show, and it's similar to Borat in that way. I think those two share a similarity. I mean, I know lots of Jews who walked out of Borat. I don't know what it says about myself that I find it absolutely hysterical. But there is that question, and I think this is asked by and about most minorities, is does it make a difference if we're making fun of ourselves versus someone else saying it about us? And I think that's a difficult question, especially, I deal with students in religious school and certainly confirmation, in high school, where we talk about these sorts of things about, well, it was just a joke. I thought it would be funny. And, when you say it to your friend, it's funny. But then when someone else says it to you, it might be offensive. And I think the producers plays with that line, and I'll even say plays with it purposefully. And that's true for many of Mel Brooks's movies. I mean, Young Frankenstein. I'm forgetting the one with Gene Wilder, the
Blazing Saddles.
Thank you, Blazing Saddles. So that's where my thoughts lie with regard to the stereotyping. I
also there's some other pieces about that, and we were talking about these ideas about the intention and who gets offended, and that, which we will talk a lot about with Borat. Also, that what comes up for me for watching the producers is that, again, sort of the buffoon of the film is Hitler. The hero is a gay man, Carmen Gia, and so I think on one level, I'm like, that's pretty great, right? He in the writing, Mel Brooks is showing the LGBTQ population as great. They're not meant to be a joke or whatever. I will say, though, now with modern eyes, it doesn't play as well, and I think plays on a lot of stereotypes, which is a whole separate conversation. But as a queer Jew, I got to say this: there is these piece about Carmen Gia that is this old stereotype of gays being very, very feminine, and that is what a gay man is. And so when I think about Hitler's getting taken down, and what makes it so popular and so funny is that he's feminine, and that the real weapon towards Hitler to make him look like a buffoon is to emasculate him. That's a part that I think representation-wise doesn't work as well.
I agree. not necessarily a higher altitude, but thinking about what Jews have historically done with thinking about their enemies. I mean, a parallel to me is the holiday of Purim, which is coming up actually. It's in a few weeks, where we take a story of an evil man, Haman, who wanted to kill the Jews, and we make it into this carnival type atmosphere where one of the mitzvot, one of the Jewish laws of Purim is that, and teenagers love to quote this to the rabbi is, well, Rabbi, I'm supposed to drink until I don't know the difference between good and evil, between cursed be Haman and blessed be Mordecai, which there's a lot of theological depth for that. Stay tuned for a few weeks when we celebrate our holiday. But it's a time where we take something that to an extent was tragic, as Haman did cause some damage. And of course, we also sometimes lump in other tragedies that have happened to Jews. But Purim becomes this day where we actually laugh about that to some degree because we're here. It reminds me of the joke about how do most Jewish holidays, what are most Jewish holidays about? They tried to kill us. They didn't. Let's eat. The only one that doesn't, of course, is Yom Kippur. But the idea that we're here so we can celebrate. Now, with the Holocaust, it's dramatically more tragic because we lost 6 million people, as we'll talk about in a second with Defiance. So the humor, and it would be interesting for me, and I know several people on our call were, I'd be interested in the reaction of the first producer's movie, which was much closer to World War II than the second, and certainly the Broadway play, because I think the difference in Jewish community is huge, just in terms of how we live and how we think about anti-Semitism and different things. But that's a little bit of an aside. Did you want to say anything else on that, Zach?
As a minor point, because I think it's funny, and to your point about what's funny to us versus what's funny to other people, is that I think Bialystok is a funny name, and I think that's a clear pun and like joke about Jewish names and Bialy, and that to me as a for again, part of this is what do these films look like for us Jews versus what does it look like for somebody who's not Jewish? That may be something that's like for a lot of people, but that joke is very silly and tickles me.
Right. So let's go to Defiance. The first time I saw this, which was years ago, the thing I noticed was that Daniel Craig's character looks anti-type. In other words, when Jews are portrayed, it's usually, and again, for better or worse, it's usually the more intellectual type, the more nebbishy look. And here's a man who's, he's incredibly handsome, right? He's fit. He's James Bond. So, and I think that was an intentional choice to make that character, a fighter. And there are characters that play off that. There's intellectual philosophical banter that kind of is the might versus the intellect. That's a bit of an aside to the main point I want to make, which really is for this movie where it does portray something that actually happened. My interest is not the historical accuracy, although that's certainly it heightens the emotions of the film for me. But really, how does it help us think about Judaism? And for me, the first and foremost, Defiance is about the power of Jewish community. Yes, this family were heroes, and especially Tuvia. The hero par excellence. He does so many selfless things in the movie to save people. But there are a few times in the movie where it is shown that every single person not only has responsibilities to take care of everyone else, but is also being taken care of. And it's very much that kibbutz idea in Israel that we are a community. In Hebrew, we say Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh B'Zeh. Each Jew is responsible for one another. Now, I would expand that to say each person. But in Judaism, there's very much this idea that each of us are responsible for each other. And that, to me, is the main tension of the film. That Tuvia wants to take in anybody, And his brother is very concerned. Well, what about us? Well, how will we feed them? What will we do? That's one of the tensions of the movie. The other one, which I think is more relevant to this talk and certainly more interesting from a religious perspective, is about being, I don't want to say being religious, but being defiance, the word defiance, the defying the Germans and living, literally surviving, versus actually living Judaism. There's a beautiful line when they're talking about kind of doing some other things in the camp, like having some entertainment. You know, there's a chessboard that you see throughout the film. And one of the characters says, yes, we need to be strong and survive, but other things are important too. And since the Holocaust, I think there has been a tension, certainly in American Jewry, with, is it enough to simply be here? Like, so, you know, our Congregation Children of Israel, one of the things we're very proud of is it is the only congregation, certainly in Athens and in much of Northeast Georgia. And for me, without question, that is a source of pride, but that is not enough. Like, I do not only want us to survive. I want us to thrive. I want us to live Jewish lives, not because of World War II or because of Hitler, but because Jewish living is a beautiful, righteous, holy way of living. And the movie, I think, really points to that tension. Another thing that I have to say, and it's so relevant, I think, just with what's happening in the world right now, is there's another beautiful line. And again, it's very Hollywood. So of course, you know, it's a little on the nose, but our revenge is to live. We are hunted like animals, but we will not be animals. And this takes me right to what I think is one of our prime directives from Deuteronomy, tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue. And our rabbis, well, let me back up for just 1 second because this may not be obvious to everyone. Traditionally speaking, there's an assumption that every word of the Torah is perfect. And here we have this 3-word dictum, and the word is repeated. And so there must be a reason why the word is repeated. And so our sages and interpreters, and we're going to get to Rashi when we talk about a serious man, says the word is repeated to remind us that even when we seek justice, we must do so with justice. The ends do not justify the means. And and that is the main tension, I think, between Tuvia and his brother. You know, Tuvia does get revenge early in the movie, and he regrets it immediately. And then he takes another path. And for me, that's very Jewish. The last thing I'll say, and then would love to hear your thoughts, Zach, as everyone else I think would also, is the loss of faith. You know, I hope that everyone here has had the blessing either to know or to have known someone who survived the Holocaust. And there are often, with Holocaust survivors, one of two, I don't want to say extremes, but one of two paths. One of them, you know, God forgot about us, God forsake us. I'm Jewish, but I'm done with the religion, you know, kind of mentality. And the other is to kind of go even deeper. I think of our dear and beloved friend Dot Sparer from the congregation who passed away more than a year ago, who survived Kristallnacht and was such a lively, integral part of our congregation in so many ways. And there's no right or wrong, but it reminds me of what I think is an incredibly powerful teaching from a teacher, and Rabbi Young, if you're still on here, you'll remember Rabbi Hoffman saying this to us all the time. This is true in any religion. Theology is autobiography. And this movie portrays that theme, I think, more than any other that we're talking about. I do have one last thing to say. I think I'm under 7 minutes. It's a little bit of a gross analogy, and you and I talked about this earlier, Zach, but in some ways this is the counterpart to Birdcage. Because in Birdcage, that he's willing to hide his Judaism, and it's not even for the sake of survival, it's for the sake of being accepted for the sake of not being made fun of or not being judged. And here, davka, it's a great Yiddish word that's sometimes hard to define. It's like intentionally, again, defiance. They show their identity, even though it might have been easier. And again, we're not talking about acceptance. We're talking about literal survival. And so the courage of that, and I think of the courage of people like Oskar Schindler and people who hid Jews. And if anyone here has been to Israel and seen the Path of the Righteous at the Holocaust Museum, I mean, for me, that is one of the most meaningful things, to see the people who risked their lives to save Jews. Now I'm done.
I think, first off, when we were comparing notes, this was the film where the same handful of quotes, and we watched these separately. We didn't even communicate. We just like, all right, we have notes, let's put them together. The same stuff came up for both of us about these striking quotes. I will say a few things about Defiance, and to add on, because I agree with everything you said, Rabbi, that not only is a big piece of this film about the importance of community in Judaism, but it also really highlights the diversity in the community, and that you have these people and they're working over here and they're making stuff and they're gathering stuff, and you have a thinker and you have a writer and you have a teacher, and it has this diversity. And I have to say, I'm thrilled that I saw myself in this film, that when the community was being bombed and everybody's running around, you hear in the background someone panicking, not sure where their glasses are, and they're saying, my glasses, where are my glasses? So it's nice to know that even back then I would have been panicked looking for my glasses in a Belarusian forest. I will also say, Rabbi and I talked a lot about, these films, and I like to think about, when it comes to films that show a sort of non-dominant culture, if you will, how much it pulls the audience in and allows the audience in, and how much it pushes the audience out and doesn't allow it. And it's sort of like, either you get it or you don't. There's one piece I thought that was fascinating, is at the very, very, very beginning of this film, Tuvia grabs the mezuzah. It's never explained,
Yep.
but Jews would be like, yeah, it's a mezuzah, I get it. And so this idea, not only just community of home, that it's not just, well, that's where it is, and that was my home and it's getting bombed, like I got to take this with. So you see him grab it at the beginning, and then way later at the end of the film, he takes it out and he's looking at it, and sort of this thinking about home and what is it home, what does home mean? And that's a piece that I don't know what a non-Jew would think of that. I don't know if they would be like, way, he really likes that small piece of metal. I don't know what they would do, but I did think that was an important piece, and I can appreciate from an artistic standpoint, leaving it as you don't need this exposition like, I've got to have this mezuzah, let's run. So I do appreciate that piece. I'm gonna see if there was anything else. I do think, as a parallel to Judaism, about the big questions, the existential, is that gets brought up about a character says to Tuvia, like, you clearly were sent from God, and he's just like, I don't know about that, like we're just just helping, right? So then it's this question, right? Are they sent from, did God send them to help them, or is it that they just happen to be nice, and that's just it's coincidence, has nothing? It doesn't need an answer. There isn't an answer to that question. And I think that the idea of like tension is a very, to me, that question is absolutely inherent to looking at action. And I know you're going to talk a little later about with the serious man and the mitzvot. That to me was just, I really, really like that. And also, to your point, this idea that not only are they surviving, but there are good chunks of this film where we see Jews going on the offensive. And I think a lot of World War II movies, because that's how it was just, we're all just trying to survive. This was part of a narrative that I think you don't always see, is going on the offensive.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought that up. And that's part of the kind of what I was thinking too, about going against type and going against what we typically see. Absolutely. I'm looking forward to your transition to Borat from that.
My transition to Borat will be very nice. I have to do that. The rabbi cannot say those things. He's far more professional than I am. So I can't help myself. So to be clear, yes, the second Borat was released the end of last year. We're not really going to be talking about that. We're talking about the first film. So what's fascinating to me about this is, in doing deep dive, and Rab and I were looking at all these essays and write-ups about all these films, is that when it came out, a lot of the criticism, so much so that the Anti-Defamation League, at the time it came out, had a whole write-up saying, this is my words, like, this is bad. This is not good. Like, we get your intention, but it absolutely doesn't do that. Bad for the Jews, like just underline bad for the Jews. And then a handful of years later, the Anti-Defamation League had Sacha Baron Cohen come and give a whole long speech and gave an award, because it's not that simple, and it's obviously things are complex, about the problem of conspiracy theories and social media and anti-Semitism being on the rise. So that as a juxtaposition is interesting to me. And so I don't know what my conclusion about Borat is. I do think it's both. I think that since it's a satire, since he uses hyperbole to show this character to be this very big character, with people, that's part of the joke that the audience gets, is that everything is very silly and everything is very ludicrous. And his anti-Semitic jokes, if you will, are just right under there. So even, I think, just a layer down, the average person could get that. And I still think that there's a risk that people are going to pull whatever they're going to pull from it, and that people would take the songs that character has written when he did the Ali G show, and there was anti-Semitic songs and these characters and the running of the Jews, that I think a lot of people will get it and understand that it's satire, whether they like it or not. And other people, I think it does in some ways contribute to these stereotypes. And I do think it's great, and it's a problem at the same time.
Totally agree. And it's in, many people may know this, that lots of the dialogue in the movie where he's speaking ostensibly Kazakhstanian, forgive me if I get that wrong,
yeah,
is not only Hebrew, but the actual Hebrew words that you see the subtitles for. So it's the correct language. And it's, for me, it is easier. I think it's easier for one to see that movie and genuinely think that it is offensive, or that it does kind of make fun of Jews and stereotypes and minorities and people who are gay and African American and all those kinds of things. You almost have to know who Sacha Baron Cohen is. Like, I think it requires some knowledge, and that's the part that I struggle with, because if he wasn't Jewish, if he wasn't, I happen to think he's brilliant, and I don't mean solely from Borat. He was in I don't know if you get Netflix, you should watch The Spy, where he plays Elijah Cohen, a famous Israeli spy. And, as Zach said, he's spoken several times on some pretty serious issues. And I found him to be incredibly thoughtful and intelligent. And so that, I can't separate that from the movie, because I know who, the author is, so to speak. But it is one of those movies that if he was non-Jewish, I think I would find it much more offensive than I do. But that doesn't necessarily make it right, though. And that goes to that same question we asked about producers. Do you have any thoughts on that?
What also comes up for me about it is that, because the second Borat just came out last year, and what I also think is interesting is that when he makes a film, because it's easy to get lost in the weeds if it's good, is this bad, I think it's bad, I think it's good. But every time he comes out with this film or something like that, where he's talking about anti-Semitism, there's then a bunch of writing on the internet about anti-Semitism. And so even if anything that he's doing, he is pulling that back every time he's talking, every interview, back into this discussion about anti-Semitism and the problem of it. So that to me is actually beneficial. And I think with the first one, part of the, again, he's so silly, this character, he's really fun, and look at him say these wild things, where then I think even the average audience member is, when people are agreeing with him, it's like, this is funny, which is the point of the film, right? The point of the film is to come in and show and lift the veil on all this anti-Semitism, racism, sexism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it does a searing job of that. And I think it's totally fine for people to not agree with the method. I don't know that I think like that's the way. You and I feel the same way about Sacha Baron Cohen. I think he's brilliant. I think he's been in a lot of things. I think he's very, very sophisticated, and his speeches, if you haven't, I would encourage folks to use YouTube to listen to him, because he says such important things that are all the things that are baked into all of his movies: Borat, The Dictator, Bruno, the Ali G Show. All of those things are in there. So to me, I'll take the net positive that I appreciate what he's doing.
And I think similarly of Sarah Silverman, who is also Jewish, who also makes very obscene allusions to being Jewish and to minorities and sexuality. And I think it's for a similar purpose. Interestingly, her sister is a rabbi, and she references her in some of her, a Reform rabbi. I don't think I've met her, but, and she references her in some of her material. But there's a parallel for me there. Well, let's go on to our fifth and final film, A Serious Man. And there are three themes that I want to tease out from this. And I have to tell you all, this was the one that I found the hardest to kind of hone for my comments, partially because it is so unabashedly Jewish. And Zach made this point. It's not one of those movies that you almost have to be in the know. Like, it never defines what a dibik is, for example. It never defines what a bar mitzvah is. And it's so embedded in the culture and the religion. I don't think you have to be Jewish to appreciate it by any means. But it's not one of those movies that kind of, explains it to you as you go. And in the few minutes we have, three Jewish themes that I think come from this movie. One is epistemology. How do we know what we think we know? Or is it even possible to know? The second is responsibility, both being responsible, but also taking responsibility for your actions. And then the third is a Hebrew phrase that comes from the rabbinic period, hashgacha pratit, which basically translates to God's presence in the world. So, for example, this week's Torah portion is the splitting of the Red Sea when the Israelites crossed to freedom after 400 years of slavery. That's an example of hashgacha pratit, God kind of doing something in people's actual lives in a time, in a place, etc. And so there's so many places to start, but where I want to is kind of this question of epistemology, the unknowability. Time and time again, he wants an answer. As a matter of fact, he tries to see three rabbis for an answer. As an aside, so badly have I wanted to tell a congregant sometimes that I can't meet with them because I'm thinking. But it's such a beautiful part of that movie. But the idea that, or the question of why is God doing this? Do we know if God is doing this? And this question of what I'm calling epistemology comes up throughout the movie, which honestly, I didn't realize until I watched it for a second time recently. The first time I saw it, I think I was in rabbinical school. The second time was about a week ago. I mean, he's teaching Schrodinger's cat, which is very much not only how can you know, but what's the reality? How can we know the reality? There's the incredibly funny scene about the bribe where the student is saying, did I give you the bribe? That whole question again. And then the very beginning of the film, is he the dibik or is he not the dibik? We don't know. And if you going to the very last scene, and again, it's not the kind of movie that can be spoiled, but I am going to say it, is not only is there a tornado, which is the manifestation that God takes in the book of Job. And of course, a serious man is in some ways a modern interpretation of the Job story, but it's also in the parking lot, harkening back to the conversation with the rabbi. But the way it looks, it's as if the first time that he takes responsibility, which goes to that second theme, to do something wrong, namely give the student the C and then the minus just to prove a point, is when he gets the phone call about his health and when the tornado comes. And so it's meant to look as if that's a sign from God, just like the teeth, which, I mean, what an amazing story. The teeth are a sign from God. Or for us, someone gets cured of something. Is this, maybe some of us have said before, it's a sign from God. And by the way, by no means am I saying it's not, but I am suggesting that depending on what our theology is, what we think, what's happening, we may think it is, or we may decidedly think that it's not. One thing that struck me is a friend of his says at one point, we're Jews. We have all of this tradition to help us with our problems. I think that's absolutely true. If I didn't, I don't think I would be a rabbi, and I don't frankly think there'd be much use of you having a rabbi, quite frankly. But I also think that it's, in some ways, it's a cheat. The extreme of that is kind of, Madonna being a Kabbalist, right? It's like, Zach, you asked me this question, which I wouldn't have thought of, what's it like to be a rabbi in these meetings? And, he has these 2 meetings with rabbis, to try, we would call them pastoral care, right? Like someone comes in troubled. And the truth is there's no answer. There's certainly an answer to maybe an intellectual question, like what does the Torah say about this? Or what happened to Aaron after the Exodus from Egypt? I can answer that, but I can't answer suffering. I can't answer, the teeth question. And what I can do is I can provide perspective, hopefully, but not answer. And so this idea of, well, talk to the rabbi and it'll all be better is just kind of like, that's not the way it works. And I would also say in some ways that's not the way it's supposed to work. One thing that strikes me about this movie that I decidedly do not like in terms of how it portrays Judaism is I find it very selfish. It's all about what's happening to me. Why is this happening to me? It's unfair. Why? And he's always, as you said, Zach, he's always a step behind, right? Like F Troop doesn't work. The wife is cheating on him. All these things. And he's always a step behind. He doesn't know one thing to the next. And that goes to that responsibility aspect. But I just lost my train of thought. Zach, what was I talking about?
Talking about he's always a step behind,
No,
and about the mitzvot. That the thing you don't like about the film.
Oh yeah.
About the mitzvot. Yeah.
That it's very much about you. How can Judaism help me? How can is it a sign for me? And it for me, and we talk about this at CCI all the time, we are a communal, not only religion, but practice. And so, one isn't Jewish just to figure out what God's going to give to you. It's not to get that gold star that the rabbi talks about in that second rabbi meeting. Zach, right, you go ahead. I'm going to look.
Yeah. 2 points that come up to me, and Rabbi, you and I talked about this, how we could have spent the entire Havdallah just talking about this film. And that is striking to me. And what that brings up for me is there are so many layers, and that you can just keep zooming into different things. It brings up Sarah Hurwitz, who was a speechwriter for the Obamas. She wrote a book about her experience with Judaism, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, called Here All Along. And the main thesis point is that anything and everything she could want is in Judaism, and that it is endless. There's always more you can get into there, and that it's beneficial to not have like an answer, right? That it's constantly these things, everything she would ever want is in there. And I think this film mirrors the existential and infinite expansiveness of Judaism, is that there are no corners, right? It's like the constantly expanding universe. There is just all these things. The second thing that comes up for me is that this film did come out in 2009, but we're in 2021 talking about it. And that you and I were talking about this idea about, something like this is a TV show, but Marvelous Miss Maisel is very, about Judaism, and it's very heavy on that, but from a position that is very open and accepting, allowing people in who may not know any of that culture, or at the time, that thing going on. So very, very accepting of people. This movie, like you said, doesn't do that. It's just like, it doesn't come to the audience at all. You're either going to know it or you're not. What that brings up for me is that Zadie Smith, who's another writer, has talked about what it's like to write a novel in modern times, and how, because of the internet, is that a problem or is that beneficial? She sees it as a benefit because she can just write things and she knows that people are just going to look it up. Right? She doesn't have to worry about it. So this is a film that benefits from zero explanation of things, because it lends itself, much like, you and I talk about the Marvel movies, how there's just, well, what does that thing mean? And what's that? The internet lends itself. I think watching this movie now, there is no risk of like somebody watching, well, what's a Dybbuk? You could just, while you're watching it, pull up your phone and be like, oh, that's what that is. Because I do think if you are not Jewish, you could still appreciate the movie because it is so funny. But all the small things and the cultural things, I think that people could just, you have a phone, you have the internet, I think it would be fine. But I absolutely love this movie. I love that it refuses to give any answers. I love that it has Schrodinger's cat that doesn't have an answer as such a heavy theme. And that the main character, his issue is that he's looking for an answer. I need, and he's into mathematics, A plus B equals C. And so that's what I need. And Judaism doesn't work like that. Aside from like, what are the temple's hours like that I can come by? Like, that's the only way it works. But like, other than that, it doesn't.
And it's funny too, when he's talking to the student, he's like, I don't even understand the cat. I understand the math. And which is in some ways counter to how I think many of us do religion. Is many of us, it is the stories, it's the examples, the illusions, the real life things that bring us in, and not the theoretical, math, as it were. One thing that I think is important is the Rashi quote at the very beginning of the movie. I mean, for a movie, the movie's I think an hour and 45 minutes, and it doesn't play longer than that, but there's so much stuffed in that hour and 45 minutes that I found myself asking the question, why did they choose to put this Rashi quote at the very beginning of the movie, accept everything with simplicity? And Rashi was certainly the first well-known person who systematically went through our Torah and explained it in a way that's followed, that was followed in the rabbinic period and the Talmud up to now, in terms of the process by which we interpret holy text, specifically Torah and Talmud. And I ask this question sometimes about the Torah itself, of not what does this mean, but why is this here, which is a different question sometimes. And so I ask myself, why is that here, this thing about simplicity? I'm seeing my video go in and out right now. I hope I'm clear to everybody.
You're clear.
Okay, wonderful. So there is a idea in Judaism, and I would imagine other religions, but I certainly don't know, that we're not really supposed to ask questions that kind of make us go down an endless, kind of a turtles all the way down situation, such as, well, what was God doing before God said, let there be light? Or why did God decide to create the world? The idea, and there's this beautiful teaching I've shared with my congregation several times, the first letter of the Torah is the letter Beit, which is kind of a three-sided letter, and Hebrew is read right to left. And so the idea is that our lives, our Torah, emanates from that bet going forward. And so you're not really supposed to ask questions about what happened beforehand. And so similarly, the questions that he's asking are just not useful. And that's one of the reasons why he can't get an answer, because he's asking the wrong questions. And it's such an important thing in Judaism to ask. I mean, on Passover, one of the central parts of the service is called the 4 questions. That asking the right questions is so important. Figuring out what sorts of theological tensions you're going to challenge yourself with. And that for me is the tragedy of this character. And I think why they put this quote up, it doesn't mean be a simple man, like be a simpleton, but to accept things and not necessarily think God is punishing you, or conversely, God is rewarding you.
Yeah, there's so much in that film.
And one last thing, and then we could turn it over to Abraham. I haven't been able to read the chat, but I see there's lots in there. Is I love, they build kind of suspense about what this last rabbi is going to be like, the old, elder, wise rabbi. And I love that his office and the way the camera lingers on things, it's filled with all sorts of secular things. So this idea that wisdom comes from all places. Now the camera does linger for a moment on a depiction of the sacrifice of Isaac. And of course, there's a parallel there with the sun and the tornado. But I'd also that the rabbi is trying to relate to the child by, quoting the Jefferson Airplane song as opposed to quoting something from the Torah, talk about, how he chanted his bar mitzvah portion. And of course, that did it high of all things, right, on marijuana, the most, a holy life cycle event such as the bar mitzvah. But I love that he's quoting Jefferson Airplane and, Grace Slick. And then just says, be a good boy. And, it's like, then this is the last thing I'll say, just like it's the last thing that's said in the movie is, there's this beautiful story, which I'm going to summarize right now, of someone who's not Jewish went to Rabbi Hillel in the first century and asked for him to summarize all of Judaism while standing on one foot. And previously to that, he had gone to Rabbi Shammai, who was very serious, a serious man. And the story says that Shammai hid him because it's an offensive question. It's like, it would be like asking you, Zach, you've devoted years of education to psychology. Tell me everything you've learned in one sentence. Like, it's ridiculous. But Hillel, as opposed to chastising or getting angry, says, which will sound familiar because it's the double negative of what we call the golden rule, that which is hateful, do not do to others. The rest is commentary. Now go and study. Essentially, be a good boy, be a good girl. Abraham, I think we'll turn it over to you for a few questions or comments. Oh, I need to, I'm going to make you co-host so you can unmute yourself. There you go.
I think I'm unmuted.
You are.
Good. Well, as you were speaking, the commentary rolled by, and there are many comments that are worth looking at, and some suggestions of other movies and so on, and a few questions. So we'll start with the questions. What do you make of the running of the Jew joke in Borat? It stands in for the running of the bull in Spain, obviously. By the end, it is converted to a more acceptable tradition because it isn't nice to the Jews. This Sacha Baron Cohen repeats this conversion Borat too, by the way, along with other reconciliatory gestures to soften the self-deprecating anti-Semitism. Would you or Zach like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think Liz had that question, and I know what you're talking about. In the second one, there's the vaccine and all that. I mean, I guess what I would say is from just a writing perspective, the whole point in most film and in nearly every film is the main character's got to change, right? And so Borat does change to some degree, but the looping of that joke about the running of the Jews and the constant is again, I think the doubling down on Sacha Baron Cohen not letting go of the anti-Semitism, and that he's not going to stop making that joke or make it seem so simple that, oh, he went through some things that happened and now he's totally turned around. He's definitely maybe like a little nicer, he maybe like learned stuff, but I just off the top of my head, because I haven't thought about this, I think there is something about those beliefs don't just change overnight. Those don't, like anti-Semitism, you don't make like, oh, I made some silly stuff. Wow, the Jews have really had it bad and I got to be nice. I think there is and that's part of the problem, is that those views are often intractable. That's what would come up for me. Also, it's just a funny gag to repeat that back, that, you know, that he hasn't really learned, to keep him as the sort of the fool in the movie.
Rabbi, did you want to
Yeah,
comment?
I think he captured it perfectly. I think that's pretty much, that's a great answer.
Renee Musso commented
I know
about,
her.
do you know her?
She supposedly has cookies for me, and so now the public knows that she has to give me and Emily cookies. She's on the hook, but she's my mother-in-law. Everyone.
Um, her comment here is resonates a little bit about with some of the things you said early on. One thing about Defiance is that I've heard people say that there is a belief that Jews allowed the Holocaust to happen without fighting back. Here the brothers, an entire community, fight and survive an incredible ordeal for several years. It was lovely knowing that the film was based on a true story.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think my problem with that logic is the idea of blaming the victim or their survivor. And that's basically like, well, you as who were, you know, beaten terribly, you know, as a person by your partner, well, why didn't you call the police? Why do you do that? That is an overly simplistic victim blaming stance.
And I'll just add, I mean, I agree that that is a powerful depiction, and I think that's why, you know, for those who know about the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, where Jews did fight back, or the story of Masada is another example where even though the Jews at Masada died by their own hand, I mean, which is incredibly tragic, they did it on their terms, and I think that appeals is a weird word to use, but I think you all know what I mean. That there's something to that intentionality that is meaningful and powerful. And you know, for whenever groups go to Israel and stay on Mount Masada, they always have the group say Am Yisrael Chai before leaving. The people of Israel live, because it reminds us of that resolve of being, and I'm using this word purposefully, of being defiant.
This comment reminds me of something that was going through my head as you were talking about the producer. We have a characterization of Bialystok, who's this money grubber, which is a deeply held Jewish stereotype. And then there's the blue character, who's this sissy character stereotype. And then we have movies like Exodus, where Ari Ben Canaan is this superhero, and the Defiance again, where we have these fighters. So there seems to be two sides of that stereotype that we're dealing with in the media. I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to me, my thing is that makes me want to see more movies about Jews, so there can be more diverse depictions, because we cannot be boiled down to one thing. I think there is a fact that there are, Jewish people who work in banking. There are also, Jews who are painters and writers and all these other kind of things. And I think for the producers, he uses those as entry points only to turn them on their head later. And so certainly if somebody only watched the first half of the producers, they might be like, yeah, that's what they are. They're schemers, and that's something inherent to them as opposed to part of the situation. Because in the producers, it's situational, that he's on Broadway, it's hard to get something made. There's constant money pressure, pressure to succeed. And so I don't know that we have to not have somebody be, scheming or something like that, because I think that we can explore that without having to just completely ignore it.
Yeah, and like most things, it's not that simple. I mean, I remember the last trip to New York with our confirmation kids. There's a beautiful new museum called the Museum of Tolerance, And one of the, I don't know if it's a permanent exhibit or if they had it, then was this wall that showed, they called it, I think, the spectrum of hate. And it's from the Simon Wiesenthal Center. And on one side of it, they listed kind of, jokes and offhand remarks. And on the other side of it, you see depictions of the Holocaust and Kent State and things like that. And so Emily and I talk about this all the time because I was in an improv troupe at University of Florida, and one of the essences of improv comedy is when people give you something to play, you immediately jump to the stereotype of that thing because that's what's quote unquote funny. But I understand that it can be offensive, and even if you don't think it's offensive, I'll go back to the phrase we said earlier. It's bad for the Jews. Like, it is bad for the Jews, for us, even amongst ourselves, to talk about, and I'm not suggesting that we do this, but to talk about being cheap or controlling the media, or we're all well educated. I mean, those types of things are not good for the Jews.
Let's change gears here for a moment. We've heard from Lizzie Saltz, now we'll hear from David. It's interesting that you're not talking about Woody Allen.
Oh, I knew you were going to ask that one, Abraham.
At least one of whose movies would certainly have been included in this discussion a few years ago. Annie Hall, in particular, has a lot to say about Jewish identity, in particular, secular Jewish identity in American society, at least in the 70s. Do you have any thoughts about Woody Allen in general, or Annie Hall in particular? Is this film still worth discussing despite the complex feelings many of us now have about Woody Allen? And if you wouldn't mind, you can also comment on the anti-Semitic grandmother in that film.
I'm going to come out swinging about Woody Allen and Annie Hall. And so that devolves into a larger discussion about, can you separate an artist from their personal life? And I think sometimes I'm able to do that. Sometimes I'm not. I am not able to do that with Woody Allen. Also, I don't even really like most of Woody Allen's stuff. It just doesn't land with me. It's never landed with me. Annie Hall is good and it's funny. And it was a conscious decision that Rabbi and I talked about to not have Woody Allen's films discussed in this, in that also there's been a gazillion things written about that, and we didn't want to be so on the nose. So part of it was we wanted to try to think outside of the box about films, but also that, I don't know, it's not great. And I did not feel like I wanted to talk about it. And I just, again, it sticks to me as, I think it is one narrow thing, and that's both, right? On the one hand, he's done a lot for, like, this is what, a Jew looks like. But I also would say it's like the nebbish, neurotic, in psycho, analysis, and in New York, that is a trope that to me, as just an audience member, is boring. And so I don't know that it's so great. Those are my thoughts on Woody Allen. Hate mail, you can just put it in the mail. You can send it to me. You can text me if you want.
David, he's in the directory. I've only seen Annie Hall once, and it was a while ago. So I do recall the line about, the universe is expanding, or, he's depressed because the world's going to end someday. And I know my parents know that film and many of his well. It would be a very interesting conversation that perhaps we could all have at the congregation sometime about what Zach brought up of, difficult arts, or so an example in Judaism. I'm going to forget his name. So Shlomo Carlebach was a very well-known rabbi in the mid to late 20th century. He was modern Orthodox or Hasidic, but he wrote a lot of songs, and several of those melodies we sing at Temple, even if you're not aware that that's who he is. And he was part of the Me Too movement in terms of, many stories about him seducing women and doing inappropriate things. And there is a lot of controversy. I mean, I see it all the time on kind of the CCAR, that's the rabbinic organization that I'm a part of, Central Conference of American Rabbis, of should we use him, should we not use him? There's so many other wonderful musicians. Why don't we highlight female musicians, especially in this moment of Me Too and gender equality and these sorts of things? And I do have trouble with maybe not as a rabbi, but as a person. So for example, I like Michael Jackson music, right? I'm going to listen to Michael Jackson music. I may not play it at a temple event, just like I'm not going to show Woody Allen at a temple event. But would I watch a Woody Allen movie? Would I watch a Mel Gibson movie? I would. I'm not arguing that that's the right choice, by the way. I completely understand how offensive these people are, and they're offensive to me. I'm not, but but for me, there is something about, the movie has something to say. It also had a whole crew that, are they suffering because we're not supporting them? And I mean, I think it like other things, it is not so simple, but certainly a worthwhile conversation. But I do want to echo what Zach said, that it was very intentional not to use him. Also, because we didn't want to start talking about a movie and then other people not think about the themes, but think about, wait, why are they using Woody Allen? He's such a controversial figure, which I would very much understand.
Yeah. Also, one other thing. Again, Woody Allen's films, just his films, have never spoken to me, regardless if of any of his personal life. But Roman Polanski, also Jewish, I absolutely love every film I've ever seen by him. And I think something like The Pianist is talk about a theme about Judaism and the Holocaust and survival. But that's also, I feel that internal struggle, which is maybe just being a Jew, is that internal like service and all of that, about that, his personal life and his films. And so that comes up, and it could be a whole other Havdallah program.
Right. I mean, The Piano is another
Piano, not The Pianist.
powerful.
No, The Piano and The Pianist, right? Two different movies.
Oh, that's right. He did both of those?
No, they're just two different movies.
Oh, yes. The Piano, yes.
Piano's with Anna Paquin. That was like her first. She won an Oscar for that. And then Pianist, Adrian Brody.
He is good. He is good.
I think we'll end with the word good.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Zach.
And
everybody, yeah.
I'm gonna take off the presenter hat and just some announcements. First of all, thank you everyone for joining and tuning in tonight. And I want to thank Abraham and the rest of our special programs committee. We've had a wonderful lineup, this program notwithstanding, of Havdallah programs this year. And for those CCI members, we have a wonderful bar mitzvah this weekend, Trevor Nugent. I've sent emails about that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that, but this weekend and next weekend are both celebrating two B'nai Mitzvah, Trevor Nugent, and then next weekend, Orrin Taylor. And it'll be wonderful to see you and your families. And I also want to thank Zach. This was fun to do with a fellow congregant and friend, and I think it certainly helped me hone and challenge some of my own thoughts, and hopefully was fun for everyone.
Yeah, we talk a lot in general, but we had a lot of really great conversations recently about all these. So I'm glad to be a part of this. Thank you, Abe. Thank you, Jessica, who is always a tough act to follow. And glad everybody joined in.
And I'll let, if people, I mean, I'm happy to just schmooze and kind of hang out for a little while. Everyone's welcome. There are 50 people on right now, so it might be difficult, but we can handle the cacophony. So everyone's welcome to unmute themselves if you'd like.
Thank you, Zach and Rabbi. That was really good.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Larry.
Same here.
Fantastic program. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Anyone watching a movie tonight?
No, maybe tomorrow afternoon. One night in Miami, perhaps.
Oh yeah, I wanted to see that. Callie and I watched The Dig on Netflix today, and it was pretty good.
Oh, before other people hang up, Rabbi Young, I don't know if you saw in the chat, but his weekly class is tomorrow at 3 p.m. our time, and he invited everyone. And the movie is it's with Susan Sarandon.
Dead Man Walking.
Thank you.
Sean Penn and Susan Sarandon.
Excellent movie. Excellent
So
movie.
if anyone wants to join that, feel free to email me, and I could send you that information tomorrow at 3 p.m.
Anybody see Bridgerton?
Callie did.
I got hooked in, believe it or not.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
It was good. I liked it. Well, I'm going to sign. I have to make some kasha varnishkas. So, everybody, stay safe.
Bye, Dad.
Bye-bye.
Bye, son.
Bye, Mom. I'm going to head out as well. Rabbi, we'll talk to you probably tomorrow.
Absolutely. Yasher Koach.
Yasher Koach to you.
Thank you so much. I found you on line. Where are you located? Where's your synagogue?
Oh, in Athens, Georgia?
Yes, what is that near?
It's about an hour-ish away from northeast from Atlanta.
Okay, I just wanted an idea.
Just curious, how did you find
I
us?
was online. I don't know. It was something a Jewish learning thing, and it listed different events that were happening, and I was attracted to this one, and that's how I found you.
Fascinating. Well,
So
I'm thrilled you joined.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much. I'll check in on your synagogue again
Absolutely.
to see what's happening. I'm welcome. Thank you so much. It was wonderful. Thank you. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Okay. Well, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
And Mom and Dad, we'll FaceTime tomorrow. You can see your grandson.
Did everybody hear that? Did everybody hear that?
Good night, everybody.
Good night.